And the general idea is that all you have to do is grab your guitar and sling it over your shoulder and get out on the highway and get your thumb out and kind of thumb your way on up to Toronto or some other big city. And 2 or 3 months later, you're going to be a big star. You just know you are. You're going to drive on back home in your big old Cadillac. Isn't that right, Brent? That the way it goes? Yeah. Don't always work that way. Sometimes it works like this instead. Well, the scream of the jets through the smoke-heavy skies of the city, and the roar of the traffic and the rumble of the subways underground. Well, they're just background music for my mind as I stand here thinking of the love of that woman that I left in that little country town.
The songs of Stevedore Steve Foote remind me of home. We both grew up on the East Coast, where the age-old story has always been about moving away to make it big. I was playing the music of Stevedore Steve long before I knew anything about him. Once I heard that he and the iconic Stompin' Tom Connors had been hitchhiking pals, I knew I had to find out more. I heard of a fella in Toronto who had known Steve fairly well, so I went knocking on his door to ask a few questions. Before we got into the stories, we shared a few of the songs.
Well, roll out the gangplank and all hands aboard. Turn the derrick round, boys, hear the winches roar, and open up them hatches and we'll get the stuff ashore. Hard slugging, rough and tumble, rugged stevedores. They're hard slugging, rough and tumble, rugged stevedores.
I'm Steve Fruitman, the host of a radio show on CIT Radio in Toronto. And I've been doing radio in Toronto for about 31 years. And I'm a big Stevedore Steve fan. Steve was born the 3rd of January, 1938. And Tom was born on the 9th of February the same year. So they were just about exact same age, and they were in the hospital getting their tonsils out. And that's when they first met each other. Steve was really impressed with Tom because he stuck his finger in a light socket and almost electrocuted himself. They didn't see each other again for another 7 or 8 years when they met in the all-night diner in St. John, New Brunswick.
I was going to put a coin in the jukebox, and a little voice out of the corner said, "Play a good one, huh?" And I said, "Well, what's your idea of a good one?" He told me, "Oh, anything by Hank Snow." So I did. I played some by Hank Snow and went over, sat down, and talked with him. I said, "My name's Tom." "Yeah, my name's Steve," and that started off. Well, we wanted to see Canada. We catch a ride on a train, a boxcar, or didn't matter, coal gondola for that matter. We did, as a matter of fact, rode in open coal gondolas, different things. The thing was, when you go into town and a couple of ragged-looking highway kids, we didn't have any money. So go right straight to the police station and say, "Look, we just want to put up overnight." One time in a little Thurso jail, he said, I'll prick my thumb, you prick your thumb, get the blood going there, and then just push our thumbs together and join blood, and that makes us blood brothers. I said, fine. And we did.
Neither of them were giggers at first. They would play on a street corner, they would busk for a few bucks until about 1964, 65. That's when Tom started playing actual gigs. Steve, at that time, was in St. John working as a longshoreman. Tom encouraged him to go to the talent agency that he was going to out of Toronto, but they didn't like his name, Stephen Foote. So Tom suggested Stevedore Steve, and that's how he got that moniker. And they went in and recorded this album, Songs of the Stevedore, in about, I think it was about 45 minutes or an hour to record the whole album. He writes songs about all kind of stuff. He liked to get into kids' songs, he liked to get into funny songs, goofy songs, serious songs, heritage songs about the country and stuff like that. He had a vast array of songs, but one of the things he liked are funny, goofy songs.
When I first started up this silly little habit of writing songs and putting them out on records and stuff, I had some really great fortune with a little fun song that I wrote. It not only got to the top of the charts across Canada, but it wound up literally going around the world for me. I'm Lester the lobster from PEI, an ugly little bug with beady little eyes, and I'll tackle anything up to twice my size. I'm Lester the lobster from PEI. I'd like to send a message to the people of the world. If anyone should come across a little lobster girl who's as red as Prince Edward Island sitting in the sea, rate her up and ship her here and send her COD. 'Cause I'm less.
Well, he just wrote it, he put it on his album, and radio stations started playing it, which was unusual because they really disliked playing anything by Canadians at the time. But in 1972, of course, the Canadian content regs came in, and they had to find stuff that would be palatable to their audiences that was Canadian.
Thank you so very much indeed.
And it certainly led to his increased popularity as well as getting the TV show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to our show. But now I want to make a special point of thanking the viewers at home and thanking them very much indeed for what we call the old mailbag. Now, first of all, this here is the Stevedore Steve Show's mailbag. That's awfully nice to see, I'll tell you right now.
They were half-hour shows. Minimal sets. I mean, when they did, Steve would always do a gospel song in the show, even though he wasn't religious. But I used to watch the Stevedore Steve show all the time.
Someone's praying more.
Steve was very into equality of people. And he met so many people on his travels, rich, poor, young, old. It didn't matter where they were from. If they treated him nicely, you know, that was all they cared about.
Brent and I, and my wife and Brent's wife, are very close. And as a matter of fact, I was talking to Helen the other day, and I got her to sneak your fiddle down here without you knowing about it. How about running off a little something? Just kind of, remember how we used to do in those little jam sessions around the kitchen table and that?
Your fingers are getting pretty stiff.
How long you been playing fiddle now, anyway?
It's been a few years since I've touched it, I'll say.
Steve did write a song called Fellow Man about racism. What the hell if he is black or white or yellow? He's a man, you know? And nobody was singing about that in country music in 1971. I mean, that was unheard of.
Mr. Brent Williams. Brent, thank you, buddy. Thank you very much indeed.
Fellow man, fellow man, what if he is black or white or red or yellow? He's a man. When our spears are beat to plowshares and the plows then till the land, perhaps then we all will realize we're each other's fellow man.
He used a lot of adjectives in his songs which were quite different than Tom. Sinews in his arms, and muscles and strength, and like all these kind of adjectives he would use to give his songs power.
Now, around this time, Stompin' Tom was doing pretty well for himself.
Well, Tom was a superstar. I mean, the two were not on an equal platform here. Tom was a superstar.
Presented to Stompin' Tom Connors in recognition of outstanding Canadian sales of over $100,000. Canadian Music Sales Corporation Limited, President T.P. Regan. That's the album of Bugs Bud. This is Judy.
Judy, how are you doing, darling?
Stevedore Steve Foote, Stevedore.
Very pleased to meet you.
Great. Down the docks in St. John.
Yes, and it's been a long time since we were down there, too. Come along there.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, we covered quite a bit of ground since we were down east together, you know.
In 1976, the Canadian tax laws were changed. So Steve turned out, he was one of the typical artists of 1976, 77 that were confronted by big tax bills and couldn't pay them and had to leave the industry. In Steve's case, everything that he had was repossessed. He went back to New Brunswick, and that's where they found him. Well, they took his van. They took all of his unpublished songs. Or they took his guitar, and they confiscated it all. But it led to a very bitter time in his life when he went from successful recording artist, television show, playing gigs, to bankruptcy. To add insult to injury, Steve had someone knock on his door and say, "Is this stuff yours?" And he would find burnt out pieces of paper, photographs. They just took it to the dump. And he went back to St. John, got out of the music business totally, and started working in construction.
I told that girl that I'd return like a big wheel from the big city. Yeah, I'd have money and clothes, be driving a big fancy car. Well, this big wheel's gone flat, my shoes have got holes, and I'm busted. All I've got left is my pride, I'm not sure it'll go very far.
I was really amazed. There was no Stevedore Steve anymore. I think it was 1988. I said, well, let's go down to the Maritimes and look up Stevedore Steve.
What was his reaction whenever you show up at his house and not only do you know who he is, but you know some of his songs?
Oh, he was always, Jenny, he would say to his wife, I can't believe these boys actually took the time to learn my songs. He always did that. Well, Steve was a dreamer, and a lot of his songs were written in his dreams. And he'd be not even awake and he'd write these songs down. The night before we arrived, he had a dream that people from Ontario arrived. So he welcomed us into the house because of that. Steve had his original guitar returned to him from the dump, actually. He had been given this little portable tape recorder. So he started writing songs again. He pulled out the guitar and started singing us a few of these songs and couldn't keep the guitar in tune, so he would just get really frustrated. So he just said, well, look, I've recorded some tapes. Do you mind hearing them? And he was always very apologetic about forcing me to listen to his music. And for me, of course, and Kevin, more Stevedore Steve songs was just incredible. We couldn't believe it.
The studio itself amounts to a stick of wood shoved into a barbell plate here on the bottom. And we had an assembly of musicians right here in the kitchen, and we were all plugged into the one jack. Quite a feat of engineering in itself. Recorded the tape via studio on a stick.
Although Stevedore Steve achieved some recognition, he remains virtually unknown in Canada and even in his home province. Too often, the bright lights of success can turn to a studio on a stick. In 2016, Steve died at the age of 80. I had planned to drive over to St. John to meet him someday, but I missed my chance. All I can do now is keep singing his songs.
And I can tackle anything up to twice my size. I'm Lester the lobster from PEI. I'm Lester the lobster from PEI.
Perhaps someday the Cape Breton miners will sit back and push some buttons. Perhaps someday the North Atlantic will give up its fish to mechanical hands. Perhaps someday the waterfront docks will no longer need the strength of the stevedores. Perhaps someday the farmers and bushmen will have computers make all their plans. But that's perhaps, and that's someday, and this is now. And right now, the East Coast way of life is hard as hell. The men are even harder with blistered hands and aching backs. They try to keep their families fed. Some think East Coast folk are backward. Some like me didn't get much schooling. But I'll tell you one thing, mister. They raise hard-working men.